This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Section where we'll look at a couple of different views of the African or the African origin or descent. Is quite critical views. People of African descent in the 18th and 19th century. I'm going to call upon first Jeff Green. Jeff Green has put this as all regular. How many have you spoken for this now, Jeff?
Well, it's paid so good.
For those who don't know Jeff's a Londoner. Since 1979, 3 states, but black presence in Britain. He has produced books, articles, radio and television programs, lectures, etc. in Britain and America. His study of African Americans in Victorian Britain is currently under consideration in the USA. So, oh, you want to speak?
Yeah.
It's high tech.
Hello there, my paper is called The Murderer, the Servant and Lady Grey, Victorian Africans in the Historical Record. And the paper will attempt to stimulate those who believe that Africans, indeed people of African descent in general, are absent from the British historical record. My belief is that far from being excluded from the historical record, African men, women and children in Victorian times are to be seen in a wide number of locations and active in a variety of occupations. My paper looks at 4 people. Just 4 people, I hear you asking. Of course, there are other Africans. I don't have time to detail the lion tamers, the boxers, the preachers, the students, the doctors, and so on. This presentation deliberately takes British places and institutions which do not spring to mind when considering Africans in late Victorian times. And they were documented in newspapers, memoirs, and diaries, the usual sources of information. First, horrible murder, an horrible murder. The Gloucester Hotel was a pub near Swansea's docks. In the early hours of a Sunday morning in February 1889, the owner's wife woke to find an intruder in the bedroom. She fired a revolver at him. He rushed off, and then she found her husband, Frederick Kent, had been cut. He died 3 hours later. The police, assisted by neighbours, searched, aided by the intruder's footmarks in the snow. They led to the docks. 6 hours later, they found a man covered in blood with a bullet in his thigh. He dropped his razor, which had been used to cut the victim, and his cap in the bedroom, and the latter, the cap, helped identify him. Quote, said to be a Zulu, unquote, who'd been hanging about the town. He'd been a sailor on the Cubana. A short, slim, black man named Thomas Allen. He was taken to the police station and on the way was abused by the local people because Frederick Kent had been well respected. Now these details come from the Aberdeen Weekly Journal. This murder took place in Swansea in South Wales. The incident was very widely reported in the British press. I've used the Western Mail of Cardiff as another source. It reports the inquest, and Allen, who was a ship's steward, said he had not intended to harm anyone. Nothing seemed to be known about Allen, although a black man with that name had been sent to prison in June the previous year. Allen's English was fluent, and there were reports that he'd been educated at a mission school in South Africa. He said he'd been invited into the private part of the pub by one of the servant girls. Both of the girls denied issuing such an invitation. He'd been attacked by Kent when he, Alan the African, lit a candle, and he grabbed Kent's razor in defence. Mrs. Kent testified that her husband had had a beard for 15 months and that she'd never seen the razor. The jury at the inquest agreed almost immediately that Kent had been murdered by the African. Alan withdrew his statement about the invitation and said the whole case was based on mistaken identity. A London gutter press sensational weekly, the London Illustrated Police News, and you need to see it to see how appalling it is. It said that Alan had sent a 4-page letter to the widow from the prison. Now, the murder trial after the inquest was the main trial in Cardiff, and the court there heard that Alan would not deny killing King, but he'd gone into the bedroom at the invitation of a young woman, but not with the intention of committing murder. The woman, Annie Taylor, was brought from Swansea prison and told the court she hadn't seen the African for some days. That was reported in the London press. Alan was found guilty and sentenced to death. A substantial report appeared in the Western Mail of Cardiff, and his letters to the widow had removed any doubt over identification, although Mrs. Kent said she didn't recognise him. The jury took 5 minutes to reach a verdict. The Reverend Oscar Snelling organised a petition seeking a reprieve. The edition of the Western Mail published a letter from someone who'd been in the court who pointed out that Alan had been attacked by Kent and that Alan had defended himself, so the charge should be manslaughter, not premeditated murder. The petition in Swansea was signed by 4,000 people, including Swansea's mayor. The Home Secretary saw no reason to interfere, and on the morning of the 10th of April 1889, Thomas Allen met his death on the scaffold. He had again written to Mrs. Kent asking for forgiveness, and she had replied and granted that wish. At this point, I'd like to do 3 observations. One, that the petition was signed by the mayor. It is the Victorian England, the mayor, or Victorian Wales, the mayor was a self-important person, of course. The Home Office was unaware of this incident. There is a file in the Home Office, which I can go into details later, and it refers to a Barbados-born sailor who killed the captain of a ship the year before, and the trial of that sailor had led him to be not executed but sentenced for manslaughter because of the ill treatment. And basically the third point I'd like to make here is it's not easy to draw clear conclusions about British legal justice and African people in Victorian Britain. So we go to chapter 2, the African servant. There were dozens of African servants in Victorian Britain. The once famous explorer Samuel Baker, of whom it has been said he had an incredible inability to understand African aspirations, was a big game hunter turned administrator who travelled around Sudan and Uganda in the 1860s and 1870s. He named Lake Albert and was knighted. He was with his Hungarian wife Florence. Her diary was published in 1972. It notes that among the dozen servants they had at the end of 1871 was, I quote, little Aman, an Abyssinian boy of about 10 years old, whose master, an Egyptian soldier, had ill-treated him. Little Aman was eventually brought back to England by Lady Baker and was to be a happy member of her household for many years. The Bakers moved into a large house near Newton Abbot in Devonshire in 1875. They lived in Cyprus for a year. They made a global tour of India, Japan and the USA and spent winters with Sir Samuel's brother, General Valentine Baker, who headed the Egyptian gendarmerie. The Devon house was their home 5 months a year. Years later, their granddaughter recalled, Aman, the little Abyssinian boy who Florence, hidden with her skirt, his fierce Arab master was chasing him so long ago, was now a most well-mannered man, walking behind them when the children were taken to parties or out to tea. Samuel Baker died in 1893. His widow died in 1916. I haven't yet come across a photograph of a man, but I haven't looked very hard. Again, some observations. Tradesmen, those making deliveries, other servants, all saw the Ethiopian in Newton Abbey. He would have been noticed by the local people, and when he accompanied the bookmakers abroad. Evidence of African servants in Britain can be found in grave markers, tombstones, and the historical record includes census and group photographs, which are standard sources, but you have to look. And really, this paper's point is to remind us that you can't claim something doesn't exist and say we look for it and haven't found it. So the third character, the third person, actually it's two people, the third person in this talk, Lady Mary Grey. The 8th Earl of Stamford was born in 1812, that's a long time ago, and he was then known as Harry Grey. He was an Oxford graduate who became what was known as a remittance man. That's a person who receives a regular payment for staying away from England. A remittance man. The fact that the name exists gives you some idea of how many of these people there were. He settled in South Africa in the 1850s, and in the late 1870s was living with Martha Solomon, a woman known as a Cape-coloured lady. The photograph shows she was distinctly African. In October 1877 they had a son named John. In 1880 they married, and their daughter Mary was born in July the following year. The death of the child's 7th Earl meant the title went to the deceased's eldest brother, and then eventually to the Cape Town remittance man through inheritance, and he was now the 8th Earl of Stamford. His annual income was £8,000, and when the old Earl's widow died, the inheritance will be a mere £30,000 a year. The new Earl died in Africa in 1890. Roman Dutch law in South Africa recognises as legitimate children of parents when they marry after children have been born. English law requires parents to be married at the time of the birth of the child, for that child to be considered legitimate. So British law defined John Grey as illegitimate. His sister was not, so she had been and remained Lady Mary Grey. And their mother was the Dowager Countess of Stamford. The title went to the deceased cousins in 1892 after considerable publicity in Britain and discussions in the House of Lords, and I refer to the Times here, it goes on for columns, the Times in 1892. Now at this time, all the family was in South Africa and had not been in Britain at all. Mary and John were sent to school in Switzerland in 1897. English relatives arranged for John to have an apprenticeship with an electrical engineering company in Chelmsford in Essex. They visited South Africa and toured Europe. Mary, Lady Mary Grey, married English novelist Meredith Starr and had 2 sons in England. She died in the 1940s. Her brother John, who hadn't been allowed to become the Earl of Stamford, married a Chelmsford woman named Emily Moore in 1904, and they had a son. The old Earl, the remittance man's widow, the remittance man's, doesn't matter, the one who had the money, she died in 1905. They set up a trust fund of £125,000 for John and his heirs. He was a wealthy, young, untitled man in Essex. That sounds reasonable. John's fate is not known. Their mother is known to have died in Cape Town in 1916, and that the earldom became extinct in 1976. Observations on this: the British education of John Grey his marriage, I'm not even sure of the forename of his wife, and the future life after the marriage needs investigating. Lady Mary Grey, who'd had the title since she was 2, died in England in the 1940s. And one wonders who she knew and what was thought of this dark-skinned aristocrat. The newspaper reports of 1892, when the court case was going on, or the legal trials, can this individual be a legitimate heir to the Earldom of Stamford, blah, 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 does have what we might expect in a Victorian racist comment. I'll quote from the St James's Gazette, which is not a particularly right-wing paper. St James's Gazette of May 1892. A peer whose mother was a Kaufmann and his grandparents, not very far removed, ladies and gentlemen, who went about clothed only with chastity, and perhaps occasionally dined off people to whom they owed a grudge, would have been a very striking novelty in the House of Lords. Right. Summary. A summary. Three of these Africans came to my attention, as they would have done in Victorian times, through reports in the newspapers. The African servant in Devon was mentioned in a couple of books in my own library. Suggestions that Africans in number, suggestions that Africans in Britain were few in number and that historical records exclude them have to be rejected. Now, in a little chat today, you have an African in Newton Abbot, an African in Swansea, and an African in Chelmsford. Now, if you write your details, your email address on this pad here, the bright yellow thing, I'll send you a copy of this 7-page talk. It has all the source notes. Your email address will then be destroyed, eaten, and all those other things. You will not be sent questionnaires on your mortgage arrangements or anything else. But what is important is 2 things here. One is on Sean's little table at the back there, there's a flyer for some books, by a book which I'm associated with and which Anne has arranged a discount for people who don't want to buy them. And also, more important than anything else, thanks very much for listening. Thank you.